This is Paul from Twist and Shout, and I want to welcome you to a new series of videos we'll be doing. Similar to how we do Tales of the Wall, we're not going to end that, but we're going to introduce another series and then we'll alternate them. This one's going to be called Vinyl University. And what we're going to do in Vinyl University is talk about various aspects of records, how they're made, the history of them, how you take care of them, how you sell them, how you buy them, the difference between mono and stereo, and all the different pressings and things. We'll go into a lot of detail, and hopefully this will be a very educational and interesting series, and we'll get some cool facts in there too as well. Today I'm gonna start the whole thing off by kind of giving you a brief introduction to formats and how we got to vinyl as we know it now. So the first thing I want to talk about is the cylinder. And this, in 1877, Thomas Edison, the famous guy who invented the light bulb and all that other stuff, invented the first phonograph, which was essentially some tin foil with music etched into it and wrapped around a cylinder that was read by a copper wire. So that was the first thing. In the late 1800s, Alexander Graham Bell, the guy who invented the telephone, and his brother and another couple of inventors actually invented they made it more usable with this cylinder. And this is a good example of Edison's technology, and after Bell Labs created the real cylinder, and this is what they look like. They were originally tin foil over just a cylinder, and then in this form, it's a form of wax. So it's a wax cylinder that you'd put on a player, and it would spin around, and a little needle would read it. And the music would come out of a horn. So that's really the first mass-produced transmission for recorded music. Around 1915 or 1910, Edison himself figured out this flat version. And here is an original Edison record, and they call them and these actually these cylinders were the first thing called records, short for recording, and they were called records. See, it says cylinder record right on it. Then next they introduced these big, you can see they're really fat, and this was an Edison, and this lasted, this started losing favor in about 1910. By 1915 they were gone, and things had moved on to this, which is similar. This is a 78 RPM, and 78 RPMs were first introduced in 1898, so the end of the 1800s, but they didn't really come into popularity till about 1910, 1915, and they lasted as the primary way people bought music in America and the UK and actually throughout the world until about 1950 in America. And then they even went on longer than that. Children's records, I remember children's records up into the 70s and late 60s that were 78 RPM that my parents bought for me. In addition, there are, from India, there are Beatles 78s. From India. So they did last longer, but in terms of popularity in America, mass popularity, around 1950 they started going away. It's one song per side. It runs at 78 RPM. So what does that mean when we say RPM? That means revolutions per minute. When you put it on the turntable and it starts spinning around, these turn around 78 times in 1 minute. A 33 turns around 33 times, a 45 times. One of the big mysteries, and these things are called 78s, 33s, and 45s. A lot of people don't know where that came from. That's where it came from. So these things spin around very quickly, 78 times per minute. Sound was pretty good. What they're made of is a combination of shellac and other materials like ground up rocks, all kinds of things. Depending on what the material is, they sounded better. There's a very famous company called Paramount that did most of the great blues records, or many of the great blues records, and they used very cheap materials. So their records in the early days don't sound good. They used shellac and mud and rocks. Later they got more and more refined in how they built these and how they made these, and the 78 records started to sound pretty good. There are a lot of people who still collect 78s. I still buy them. In terms of blues and jazz and some old country, especially in the stuff pre-war from the 20s and up to the mid-30s, there's a ton of great music that never made it to LP, never made it to CD, and they sound remarkably good when you play them on a decent 78 player. It's one song per side, and that's pretty much what happened. They changed from shellac to vinyl in World War II because they needed shellac for the war effort. So that's when they started making vinyl records. Right there, let me just say something. Records are called a number of things. LPs, which stands for long play, record, which is for recording, or vinyl, which refers to the material that they were made of. Under no circumstances are they called vinyls. Please, tweet this out. Send this to everybody you know. Records are not called vinyls. The plural of it is vinyl. The singular of it is vinyl. A record is made of vinyl. You can say, when you say, I want the new Metallica record, and they say, would you like it on CD or vinyl? That's correct. But to say, would you like it on CD or vinyls, is not correct. Or if you're buying two records, they're not vinyls. It's still vinyl. Okay, that's the only point I'll make about that. Next was introduced 45s. Well, no, let's go to 33s. 33s, and this is the format that you, our listener, and the average American is going to be most familiar with. It's 33 revolutions per minute. The first one, and this is the first LP. You may not believe me, this isn't the very first one to roll off the the conveyor belt, but this Mendelssohn recording, and this is an original, was the first record made at 33 RPM. And this was made in 1948. Columbia decided, these 78s, we need something longer that we can put more than one song on, and we also need something that sounds a little better and is a little less breakable, because the 78s are tremendously fragile. They're very easy to chip and break, and they're extremely heavy to move around. So they introduced these LPs. These LPs are able to hold up to 22 minutes, I believe, per side. So thus, a lot of songs, a full work of classical music sometimes. It offered so much more flexibility to the consumer. So suddenly here's a record, and they were mass producing them with multiple songs. At the same time, people still craved for just the single. They just wanted the one song. So 45s were introduced, and this is a 45, and it's 45 RPM. It's usually one song with one song on the other side, and they were introduced in 1949, the year after LPs. They were really, because remember, 78s were still going till about 1950. So 45s were introduced as an alternative to 78s. It was a way to get one or two songs, but they were cheaper, far more durable, and they sounded infinitely better because the speed of that it revolves makes a difference, and 45s are often considered to be better sound than 33s. 78s you would think would also be even better, but because the materials were so primitive and the way they recorded them often, they usually don't sound better, although some do sound really great. Some terminology that you should know about 45s are they're called 45s, they're called singles, they're called 7 inches because they are 7 inches. These are 12 inches. 78s are 10 inches diameter, right? There's the A side, there's the B side, also called the plug side and the flip side. The plug side they were sent to radio programmers, and this is the side they wanted you to plug. The flip side, when I was a kid, I remember getting it and seeing a flip side, and I thought, oh, they're trying to tell you this is the side you're going to flip over. That's not what they mean. They actually mean when you flip it over, it's the flip side. So those are some terms that you will hear record store guys talk about that you may wonder what the flip side means, what the plug side is, A side, B side, all that. So these started in 1949. In the 50s, they took off like wildfire in the era of hits. And they really, I think Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone was one of the first ones where it was so long they put it half on side A, half on side B, and that became kind of a thing in the 60s. And in a way, I think that actually hurt the 45 because it was, I think a lot of serious listeners were like, well, I'd rather get the LP and hear the song without a break. And so that was what happened there. LPs have continued, and they continued throughout the 60s, 70s, and it was only in the 80s and 90s that this CD started to really take off and damage the sales of LPs. And when we started Twist and Shout in 1988, both formats were still very viable, LPs and CDs. Let's just quickly show a couple other formats that came and went in those years. We have tape. Tape came, and this is a reel-to-reel tape in case you've never actually seen one. And these sound amazing. They sound great, but they were somewhat expensive. The equipment was a little bit hard. You had to have a big reel-to-reel player, and you'd play it through it, and they sound great, but it never really caught on as a mass thing. It was really more for audiophiles and serious listeners. The thing that came along that did catch on as a mass was cassette. And cassettes are a little bit back now. We're starting to sell cassettes again. It's a small tape, much smaller, you can see, than the reel-to-reel. A lot of them are recorded at high speed, and the sound quality is generally not as good, certainly not as good as reel-to-reel, but they were very convenient, and they started putting cassette players in cars, so they really caught on because every car started coming with one of these. Along the same time in the 60s and 70s came 8-track. Big fat tape, you can see. They did sound pretty good, but they're 8 tracks, so the tracks would change whether it was in the middle of the song or at the end of the song, so it was a flawed medium, and they didn't last. They never really gained huge favor. They were pretty popular in cars for a while, and trucks especially, and there were also home units, and some people really loved them, but they never really caught on the way cassettes did, and that's an 8-track. A couple other formats that I just want to quickly point out, because we have so many new buyers in our store who aren't really familiar with everything. There's all the video formats, and this is an interesting one if you've never seen it. This is a laser disc. This format didn't last that long, but they did sell quite a few of them. And they're movies on these. They were flawed because they would skip. The machinery that you would play them on was not stable, and they just didn't hold well. That gave way, actually this came from VHS tape, video home tape, and again you can see it's a pretty thick tape. They looked okay for the time. Again, they were flawed. The machinery was never standardized. A lot of them worked differently. The tapes kind of had a tendency to stretch and get eaten by the machines, and they were just flawed. This, although they sold bazillions of them, but almost overnight they gave way to DVD. And DVD came directly from CD technology, and it's another disc, and movies on these discs, of course, at the same time, or actually even before, we have CD technology, which was probably the greatest revolution of sound and sales since LPs. They sold pretty much an entire generation of people replaced their record collection on CD, and what we're seeing now is an entire generation or two of people replacing their CD collection back to LP. And then one more format quickly is Blu-ray, which is another video and audio format. I believe they're very good, and the audio and the video on them is amazing. And I wish, unfortunately, CD started dying and LP took over. I wish people had explored Blu-ray a little bit more. I think both the audio and the video picture is a major upgrade. However, the main point of our series here is to talk about vinyl. So what I've done is kind of introduce you to the formats of vinyl, and let me just show you a couple other terminology things, just because this will come up. Obviously when people talk about the record, they're talking about this thing. This is the record. This is the inner sleeve. This is the cover, album cover. This is the outer sleeve. All these things, I mean, this may seem stupid or condescending, but I don't mean it to be that way. I'm actually, we talk about these things all the time, and I see some of our younger customers, I'm like, well, is that, do you have the inner sleeve? Do you have the outer sleeve? Does it have the original cover? And they're looking at me like they don't know what I'm talking about. So that's kind of the point of this series, is to just, in the privacy of your own home, you can get familiarized with some of this stuff. So some of the other things, as I mentioned, that we'll talk about as we go through this series will be mono versus stereo, how you tell the collectability of records, how you sell records. This will be a really interesting one. We'll actually give you a tutorial about how you sell records and what you should expect. And we'll do a tutorial on turntables, how to set them up, how to deal with cartridges and needles. Here at Twist and Shout now, we sell new 33 RPM records. We sell new 45s as well as used. We have a few used 78s. We do not sell wax cylinders. We sell some cassettes. We sell obviously DVD and Blu-ray, and we do not sell VHS or 8-track or Laserdisc anymore. But these are all formats that you will occasionally see here, and this is like, hopefully, an introduction for our clientele and for anybody who's interested into the world of vinyl, which comes with its own set of rules and lexicon and terminology. And I recognize when new buyers come in, they're often perplexed or taken aback by the amount of information and specialized terminology that goes with it. So hopefully this will be a helpful series for you, and you will join us on this. So this has been Paul from Twist and Shout, introducing Vinyl University, and we'll see you next time here on the next episode of Vinyl University.